Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video that I personally thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, I believe, by the fight channel known as Fight Hub TV. And this is once again going to be over the topic of the very big, colossal boxing fight that is just around the corner or just on the horizon of a Saul Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Bud Crawford. And of course, anyone who has watched my channel, you already kind of know who I'm going with, at least in terms of more than likely who is going to win the fight. I am personally going with that of a Canelo Alvarez. But of course, if Terence Bud Crawford were somehow able to win the fight, I wouldn't really be shocked either, especially with the point that they're both at in their careers. I don't think that either of them are really in their prime anymore. I don't think that either of them are at their absolute peak anymore. But as I've already stated, I do believe that Canelo Alvarez is the fighter that has more wear and tear out of the two fighters. But I still do expect a very good version of both fighters to come to the table. But the question will be about Terence Bud Crawford is that how will that quote unquote weight affect him? And on top of that, how will he handle the move up to 168 pounds? But many people, of course, they kind of give me recommendations of who to watch in terms of fight predictions or fight breakdowns. I've gotten certain, recommendations of Keith Thurman or that of a Sean Porter or, an Andre Ward or, certain other guys like that, Paulie Malignaggi. But the one fighter that, to be quite honest with you, that many people, in my view, don't give enough credit for being a great boxing analyzer, and another fighter that, or former fighter that I believe that I've also been told to watch, has been a British fighter by the name of Duke McKenzie. And he is a great, great predictor. But when I take a look at Duke McKenzie, just at least with some of his predictions, he's either someone overall that hits a home run or he's someone that completely strikes out. When I take a look overall at, some of his fight predictions, he's either right on the money from what I've seen, or sometimes, there's moments where he gets the analyzation, wrong to a great degree. But that being stated, I'd have to watch a little bit more about him. It's obvious that he knows his boxing, but just in my personal view, if you were going to ask me who I think the number one analyst is in all of boxing, from a logical and technical and realistic standpoint, I would actually have to say Chris Algieri. And of course, for those of you that do not remember Chris Algieri pretty much was very well known for getting his ass whooped by that of a Manny Pacquiao, about 10 plus years ago. But of course, Chris Algieri ended up getting that one big upset victory, I believe, over Ruslan Brvodnikov, one of the tougher, chins that I've ever seen in boxing history. Debatably the toughest boxing chin that I've ever seen in boxing history, Ruslan Brvodnikov. I can't ever remember if Brvodnikov was a champion or not, but Brvodnikov definitely was a tough fighter. He kind of first got on the scene with a tough fight with Timothy Bradley, a life and death fight. And then, of course, later on, he'd put on some other very decent fights as well. But that's pretty much what Chris Algieri was known for. I do not remember if he ever won any of the official four belts at the 140-pound weight class or if he was just a regular champion there. But that's pretty much what Chris Algieri was known for. But once again, as I've already stated, what you oftentimes notice is that usually the best breakdown artists are usually the best analyzers. They don't usually tend to be the greatest fighters of all time. They usually tend to be fighters that, either they were champions or, maybe they're coaches, certain things like that. But that's usually who the best analyzers or the best, predictors are. And another coach overall that I would claim is a very great predictor is that of Abel Sanchez. And he also, I believe, predicted Canelo Alvarez to win this fight. But that being stated, there are certain other people that I definitely respect their opinions as well, and they also pick Crawford. But that being stated, Chris Algieri, he was asked a question in this comments conversation that was very particularly interesting, and I believe that the guy in Fight Hub TV, I'm not sure what the name of this guy is, but I've seen him many, many times have great interviews with that of former professional fighters or that of boxing coaches or commentators. He asked Chris Algieri the question about what if Canelo Alvarez were to lose this fight? Would his legacy be tainted? Or would it basically be tarnished? And although, of course, whoever ends up losing this fight to someone like me, someone that doesn't have any agendas, and someone, of course, that is not looking at this from, a political or a racial or, any type of that standpoint, of course, to me, it wouldn't tarnish their legacy too much. They're both going to be all-time great level fighters. But also speaking from a realistic perspective, if we are talking about who has more to lose here, of course, obviously, it's Canelo Alvarez. And if Canelo Alvarez does end up losing this fight, his career, although it's still going to be looked at as all-time great, it definitely is going to be looked at in a completely different perspective than what it really ever was. But, both Canelo Alvarez and Ford Crawford, I think that both that there's really a lot on the line because, there of course is going to be a very big racial slash racist perspective as well from that of the LDBC and new media, but also as well, of course, from that of the quote unquote anti-black fans or certain things like that. If you're a quote unquote Terence Bud Crawford hater and if you don't want to see him, excuse me, remembered as one of the greater fighters of all time, if you're from one of those channels or one of those areas, and of course, if Crawford loses, the narrative that they're going to try to push is that Terence Bud Crawford, that he didn't really fight anybody in his career, and that he has a very weak resume, and that the first time he ever fought an elite level fighter, that he pretty much got his ass kicked. And they will not mention, or at least not much mention, overall the fact that Canelo Alvarez, of course, was the bigger fighter, and that Crawford had to move up multiple weight classes. But of course, on the other end, if Canelo Alvarez ends up losing this fight, basically the narrative that a lot of these guys, especially these LDBC and new media guys, are going to state, because they don't want Canelo Alvarez remembered as one of the greater fighters of all time, or a fighter that could be debated as the number one pound for pound of his era. What they're going to debate is that Canelo Alvarez was someone that lost every elite fight in his career, and he was someone that was always massively overrated, and that his career was somewhat of a sham. So at the end of the day, something is on the line for both of these fighters. And I think that Canelo Alvarez, and also Terence Bud Crawford are smart enough to know that. When you take a look at Canelo Alvarez, he took this fight for a reason. And it took, of course, Terence Bud Crawford to win a belt at 154 first. But he basically took a look at that and stated, okay, Terence Bud Crawford is now moving up to separate weight classes. If he's moving up 2 weight classes, I can kind of convince people that this is similar to a Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler type of fight. And on top of that, to, me versus Floyd Mayweather in a type of rematch when it happened about 13 years ago. And if I end up beating Terence Bud Crawford, especially beating him in better fashion than what certain people expect, then a lot of those narratives of me ducking, black fighters especially, or ducking these type of fighters, or not being able to handle this type of style, it may not go completely away. But to the average person, or to a lot of boxing fans, especially if I dominate this fight and embarrass Terence Bud Crawford, or at least possibly stop him and completely dominate him, then a lot of those, haters, they're going to kind of quiet down a little bit, or the noise will start to quiet down. And of course, if you're Terence Bud Crawford, people who have been claiming forever that you don't have the vastest of resumes, which he doesn't, but it is what it is. He still has a relatively great resume for his era. And he's someone overall, of course, that has accomplished a lot of great things. But if you're Terence Bud Crawford, and if you hear a lot of the noise of you don't have that great of a resume, Canelo Alvarez is pretty much the only option that you had left in order to really be remembered on the same level as certain guys like a Sugar Ray Leonard and other guys like that. So there is a lot on the line for both of these fighters. Because if Terence Bud Crawford gets dominated in this fight, although, of course, for those of us that remember, we will understand that Canelo was the bigger fighter, but there still is something to lose here. Because there are many boxers picking Terence Bud Crawford in this fight. And of course, if you're Canelo Alvarez, you're probably feeling a little bit disrespected. But if you're Canelo Alvarez's team and PR team, this is great news. And the reason why I claim that is because if Canelo Alvarez, if many people are predicting Crawford to actually beat him, then what that means is that many people are going to be taking a look at this fight as a 50-50 level fight. And if Canelo Alvarez ends up beating him and actually is able to outskill him in certain areas and is actually able to embarrass Crawford, pretty much shut him out, like what he did with the Jamel Charlo, then what that is going to result in is a certain amount of people saying, wow, Canelo Alvarez is a lot better than what we thought he was. A lot of those narratives, that we heard about Canelo Alvarez, maybe they're not quite as true as what we thought they were. So once again, there's a lot on the line for both fighters. And Terence Bud Crawford, of course, if he beats Canelo Alvarez, of course, the haters of Crawford, they're never going to go away completely, just like the haters of Canelo Alvarez or any other fighter or athlete. But the point is that the noise will quiet down a lot more, and Canelo will also be able to prove his point, at least in his mind, and to a certain amount of the other people's minds, that, see, I was a little bit too young against Floyd Mayweather when I fought him. Now, my personal view is that the only reason why he lost to Floyd? No. But he, of course, it was a little bit of a part of it that he wasn't at his peak yet. But anyways, I kind of wanted to discuss that before we started. But Chris Algieri brought up some very, very interesting points here. But there's definitely a lot of legacy on the line for both fighters. More legacy on the line in terms, of Canelo, in terms of there's more for him to lose, and more on the legacy for Terence Bud Crawford in terms of there's more for him to gain here. But either way, there still is a lot on the line for both fighters. Because narrative carries, and it carries for a long time. Narratives are almost like that of paleontology, where people overall, they believe something for decades upon decades. And then, when you actually take a look at the evidence, or a paleontologist, kind of finally digs up a new fossil or something like that, they say, well, actually, we used to believe this, but when we actually take a look at the reality, we figured out that it's completely different. Like, for those of you that, may be interested in dinosaurs or anything like that, it was once upon a time thought, that the T-Rex apparently, that they couldn't see anything in front of it as long as you didn't move. But then come to figure out, they had apparently one of the greatest eye cavities, or one of the greatest overall three-dimensional sights, pretty much in history. So the point overall is this. That's kind of like how sports narratives are. For years upon years, it's believed that it's a quote-unquote fact that, this is how their career ended up. This guy was a choke artist, or this guy was the greatest, and all this sort of stuff. And then kind of about after 20, 30 years, people kind of start to look at it in either more of a realistic or more of a narrative type of standpoint. But it finally takes someone to kind of dig up that fossil and research that narrative, or research that same case and say, no, actually, this is this is really more apropos. So this is definitely going to be, there's going to be a lot on the line for both fighters, because the narrative is going to carry for a very decently long time, whoever ends up winning or losing this fight. But anyways, that being stated, let's get into it. Let's see what Chris Algieri has to say.
This Canelo versus Crawford fight. See, a lot of people now kind of switching their pick over to Crawford based on how Canelo looked against William Skull. It seems it's 50-50, as opposed to maybe a year ago when talk began of this fight. Overwhelmingly amount of people were like, Canelo's just way too big for Crawford. Like, this is not going to be a competitive fight. Now that both fighters have had a fight to kind of see where they're at, how are you seeing it? Has your opinion changed at all?
Not a whole lot. It hasn't changed all that much. Listen, the Skull fight, could Canelo have done more? Absolutely. But is that going to be the same version of guy that's going to show up in September? No. I mean, Canelo, he didn't.
I agree with that. And on top of that, Skull is also not the same fighter as a Terence Crawford. Now, of course, many people are claiming that, well, Crawford is going to throw more in the fight than William Skull. That could either benefit Crawford or it could go against him. And one thing I'll say about Canelo Alvarez is this. I think that there's this narrative that is just going into this fight that anytime that you throw a lead hand at Canelo Alvarez, that he basically just freezes and that he doesn't know what to do. And that's just not the case. Now, am I claiming that if you have a great lead hand and that if you know how to use your feet that you cannot give Canelo Alvarez problems? Of course not. You can give him issues. But I think that there's a lot of people that believe that just because you stick a lead hand out there, that Canelo Alvarez just freezes and that he has literally no idea how to get around it. There's no way that he would be able to be where he's at today if he would not know how to counter and on top of that defend and how to get around a lead hand. It just wouldn't be possible, especially with some of the fighters that he's fought, such as Lara and Golovkin and Danny Jacobs and Charlo and some of those other guys. And a lot of people are taking a look at the Bivol fight, I think, for this fight. And although, of course, Crawford, in my personal view, can take away certain things from the Bivol fight, I don't think that there's going to be as much to take away from the Bivol fight as what certain people believe. Not only because Canelo Alvarez just very obviously, in my personal view, was not at top form in that fight because he didn't belong at that weight class and he was very tired early on, but Bivol was literally able to maneuver Canelo Alvarez around the ring in whatever way that he wanted, especially with his lead hand. And I don't think that Terence Crawford is going to be able to do that. A part of the reason why Bivol was able to take such advantage is because Canelo was leaning on his lead foot in order to kind of get certain power punches off. He was very front foot heavy. And Bivol kind of with his lead hand, not only was he able to blind Canelo at times, but he was just able to completely knock him off balance. I'm not quite sure if Crawford is going to be able to do that, A. And then on top of that, I'm not really quite sure if Canelo is going to come into that fight the same way. Canelo's feet, although they've never been great, they were horrendous in the Bivol fight. He immediately made the adaptation, though, however, in future fights, especially against Jermell Charlo. He was not anywhere near as front foot heavy against Jermell Charlo because Jermell Charlo had the game plan that he was going to try to utilize what Dimitri Bivol did by sticking out that lead hand. And once Canelo Alvarez showed that he was taking smaller steps, which of course is the key to better footwork, and then on top of that was not as front foot heavy and was patiently stalking that of Jermell Charlo, Jermell Charlo really didn't know what to do after that. Now, excuse me, that being stated, do I think Crawford, of course, has a better lead hand and better all-around boxing ability? Yes, I do. That also being stated, Crawford at times can be hit, and he's someone also that is coming up 2 weight classes. So my question is about Terence Crawford is this. How effective is that lead hand going to be really? I think that it's going to be effective to a degree. But I do think that Canelo Alvarez can get past the lead hand a bit better overall than what some people are stating. And even if Crawford does hit Canelo Alvarez consistently with a lead hand, is that just going to stop Canelo Alvarez in his tracks the same way that it did against Dimitri Bivol? I highly doubt it. Because even in other fights when Canelo Alvarez was hit with a lead hand, like against Lara and Golovkin and guys that were more comparable in size, even a Caleb Plant who was clearly bigger, but someone that wasn't quite as big as someone like a Dimitri Bivol, Canelo Alvarez still was smart enough to get inside the zone and do enough to win the fight. So my thing overall is this. I think a lot of people are just predicting that Canelo is just going to get frozen up every time a lead hand is thrown out there. That's not Canelo Alvarez. And I'm not claiming overall that maybe he cannot have some issues. What I'll personally state is this. If Crawford does want to be successful, in my personal view, he not only is going to have to use that lead hand, but sometimes throw in between the shots, get off the ropes very quickly and then occupy the vacated space. Crawford really wants to try to get Canelo Alvarez to maneuver a little bit too much with his upper body movement in the mid-range and try to kind of move outside of the distance a bit too much. That's what Crawford really wants to try to get Canelo Alvarez to do. I think that if he's up against the ropes a bit too much and tries to throw in between the shots a bit too much and also relies on a lead hand to where he expects Canelo Alvarez to just, overall kind of get blinded by this, I just personally don't think that that's going to work long term, but I could be wrong about that.
Look as fit as he did his last fight. He didn't look. He looked listless. He looked like he didn't care. He didn't have the crowd behind him. And Marcus, you've been to a ton of Canelo fights. You know how that arena is. It is insane. Insane. In Vegas, I mean, it's deafening the entire fight. I remember when he fought BJ Saunders in
Oh my
Texas.
God.
And he's
That
waving
Saunders
on
one?
80,000 fans.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, he is a gladiator. I called Tim a warrior. Canelo's a gladiator. He is there for the adoration of the fans. I just think that he was a little too clinical in there that night. He didn't have that same drive. He had a guy who just was not willing to engage.
Well, I think that's a part of it, and it's also just that Canelo Alvarez, that he's a bit older, he's a bit slower, he just cannot explode, and he's not as fast as what he once was. It's just a part of it. It's just a part of it. Like, you have these certain people overall saying, well, why can't Canelo knock out guys like Berlanga, but Hamza Shiraz can? Well, I mean, we've seen this with other fighters. Like, we've seen Manny Pacquiao against certain fighters in the latter part of his career. He wasn't able to knock out certain guys like Brandon Rios or other guys like that, but then other fighters were. So, I mean, the thing is that sometimes when you just get older, you still have a lot of great ability, but you just don't have the same, 100% ability anymore. It just is what it is. And it's obvious that Canelo Alvarez, that he does not have the 100% same ability, nor the same, I still think that he has great power. He just overall doesn't have the same level of timing nor speed as he once did. It just is what it is. But on top of that, William Skull is obviously bigger than Canelo. Like I stated, there's not been one 168-pounder that really has been, the same size as Canelo other than that of BJ Saunders. That really is about it. And I mean, of course, he fought Jamel Charlo, but he brought Jamel Charlo up from 154. But the point overall is that you take a look at every other super middleweight that he fought there, that really has started off there, they're all bigger than him. John Ryder, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, all those guys. Edgar Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, literally all those guys are bigger than Canelo Alvarez. Even, to be quite honest with you, Jamel Charlo, to a degree, I'm not going to claim that he's bigger than Canelo, because of course he was moved up 2 weight classes, but they're really comparable in size. Like Canelo and Jamel Charlo, they're both fighters that really should be competing at the middleweight class.
That's not going to be Crawford, and that's not going to be Canelo. They're going to be their peak of what they are at this point. Because again, Crawford is 38 years old. Canelo will be 30.
Agreed. And thank you for stating that, Chris Algieri. So basically, what is Chris Algieri stating? He's basically stating that neither Terence Crawford nor that of Canelo Alvarez, that they're at the peak of their career. And I agree with you, sir. And that's the best way to analyze it. You have way too many people trying to claim that one side is at the absolute peak or prime in their career, while the other overall is not. All this are bullshit. Listen, Terence Crawford is damn near 38 years old. He's going to be moving up a couple weight classes. And Canelo Alvarez is 35, but he really has the body of a 40-year-old. He's been fighting for 20 professional years against fighters half the time that are way bigger than him, or at least a decent amount bigger than him. And then on top of that, the man has fought some, legit A grade level fighters for the past decade. He has the most expansive resume out of any other fighter of the past decade against legit A grade level fighters. So that's basically the truth of the matter. Neither fighter are at their peak, neither fighter are at their prime. It just kind of depends who's at a worse point. I think that they are somewhat comparable at this point in their career. I would claim that Crawford's at a better point, but the fact that he's moving up a couple of classes, it may even it out.
Five by then. So I think they're going to be the peak for what they are at their ages. But it's easy to go, well, what have you done for me lately? That's usually how everyone kind of sees everything. So, but I think it's good. I think it makes the fight more enticing if a lot of people are thinking that Crawford can win. And don't get me wrong, Crawford can absolutely win the fight. I'm not saying he can't win the fight.
I think Crawford can possibly win as well, but I am still favoring Canelo Alvarez. I think that I'm probably going to go about 60-40 Canelo Alvarez.
In terms of how I see it, it hasn't really changed my thoughts because I know better than to just trust that last thing I saw because there's a lot of confounding factors.
So you feel Canelo's.
And let me also address this because Chris Algieri was talking a little bit earlier about Canelo was fighting a guy that just would not engage, and I agree. And I'm not someone that just mentions this point about a fighter quote unquote being a runner or being boring. A lot of the times that is a tactic used to discredit that of a lot of black fighters because of the demographics of fighters or certain fighters cannot deal with that type of slick style. That's oftentimes what it is. I get it. But what I will personally state is this. There are exceptions to the rule. And when you're William Skull and you're moving around the ring and you're barely throwing any punches and that was the lowest output fight of all time. Now, I understand that people are saying, well, blame Canelo Alvarez. He's supposed to be the guy that is the all-time great level fighter. Why couldn't he cut off the ring a little bit more? Right? And I understand that. But Canelo Alvarez pretty much, in my personal view, did about everything that he could in order to win the fight. He's a guy that's older. He cannot move around the same. He's a guy that very clearly was the smaller fighter. If you're William Skull, you're supposed to take that fight to Canelo Alvarez. You're supposed to really try to put the pressure on him, really try to put him on pins and needles. He just really didn't do anything. And he thought that he was legit, winning the fight. So, you can't win a fight overall just by throwing a couple of punches per round. And he did land some good shots in between the punches. But, it's he just really overall didn't do anything that was exceptional in the fight. And if you're William Skull and you have the size advantage and the clear age advantage, and Canelo is having problem with your foot speed and other things like that, and he's clearly overall not throwing with as much volume as what he used to, come on, dude. Try to take the fight at least. That's why I say, William Skull was someone that was running around in that ring that night, and I'm not someone that usually says that. I don't think that Floyd or that Lara or that Bivol was doing, were running against Canelo Alvarez. I just think that they were using smart foot movement, although I will say about Lara at times that sometimes he moved around a bit too much. But never, without throwing, but never would I claim that Lara was really running throughout the majority of the fight. William Skull was pretty much doing a marathon. And I'm not someone overall that does that very often. Listen, it's fine to stick and move, but you cannot beat a fighter on the level of a Canelo Alvarez doing what he did that night. He did a whole bunch of running around, not really throwing that much, and basically just expecting the judges to give him the round. You don't win a fight like that. It is what it is. You have to take the fight to Canelo Alvarez and really show him that you're there to win the fight, and he didn't want to do that. So it is what it is. That's what I consider quote-unquote running around the ring, when you're moving around and you're just not really willing to try to take the fight. So, it is what it is. Lara and, certain guys like that, I'm not really going to claim that they're running because at least they're throwing shots. And on top of that, they're trying to win the fight just in their way. But William Skull tried to win the fight, someone in his way, which, of course, is fine. But, dude, come on, you got to throw more. There would be times where he wouldn't throw, a single punch for, a straight minute. It's come on, man.
Gonna win the fight.
I lean Canelo, yeah.
Yeah.
I always have. I've always leaned Canelo. Just it's the good big man versus the good small man.
Recently, though, we've seen the good small man beat the good big man because of the speed.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, what the man overall is talking about is more than likely Alexander Usyk versus that of what's his name, Tyson Fury, or that of Alexander Usyk versus Danny Dubois. But what I'll personally state is this: Canelo Alvarez and Crawford, in my personal view, they're not too far off in terms of skills. And on top of that, Canelo Alvarez is someone that I'm not quite sure if he's going to be able to be hurt even by the hardest shot of a Terence Bud Crawford. Not saying that Canelo can't be hurt or that, that he may not feel it. But for Canelo to get legit like knocked down in the fight, or for it to just keep him aback, I'm not sure if it's going to be able to do that. That's my question. When I seen Alexander Usyk against Tyson Fury, that was kind of one of my concerns as well. I was wondering if he could legit hurt Tyson Fury. And I mean, Tyson Fury, of course, has been knocked down a few times, but also against very decent punchers. I was still wondering how good of a puncher Alexander Usyk was. Of course, he hurt AJ Anthony Joshua, but Joshua is not really known for someone that has this super resilient chin. So I mean, it is what it is. But then I seen him against Fury, and I said, oh, okay, he can legit hurt Fury. So that was a big part of the factor. The question will be is that overall, can Terence Bud Crawford, can he hurt Canelo Alvarez? And if not, I think it may be a long night for him. Even if he can hurt Canelo Alvarez, I'm not sure if he still will win the fight, but we'll see.
But Canelo's not slow. It's not like Canelo is actually a smaller man who's come up to fight a lot of bigger men.
And one thing I'll also state is this: Alexander Usyk was smart enough to keep around his same weight, for the Tyson Fury fights and all those other fights. Usyk knew in order to use his advantages with the speed and the agility that he would have to keep his weight down a little bit. Why try to compete with those guys in terms of power and size? It just really makes no sense. Terence Bud Crawford seems like he's actually legitimately trying to compete with Canelo to a certain degree in terms of the size, and I really hope that I'm wrong about that. But it appears that he legit is trying to gain a certain amount of weight. I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that, when I see him on fight night, that he doesn't weigh around 185 or something like that, because if he does that, in my view, that could be very possibly catastrophic to his chances of winning. But we'll see.
Because his hand speed, the guys can't deal with him. So his ability to cut off the ring.
So that's why when people overall state that, oh, well, this guy, he has great, hand speed and all this other stuff, I'm not quite sure if Crawford is going to be anywhere near as fast as what a certain amount of people may predict. I mean, don't get it wrong. I wouldn't be shocked if he was fast, maybe. Maybe that time off has kind of recuperated him a little bit. But don't be surprised if the time off and combined with the weight gain, if he looks really slow compared to what he was. So we'll see.
The fact that he imposes his will, he puts a lot of mental pressure on his opponents.
And I seen Terence Bud Crawford in his last fight against Madrimov, and he didn't look anywhere near as fast as what he once was. He looked slower in every category. And once again, I've already told people this: when you gain weight, you're slower, not just in one category. And this is what Shane Mosley was trying to state. Like, you're not just slower in just one category. You're slower in literally everything. Your feet slow down. Your movement and your upper body movement slow down. You don't have the same head movement or the same, feet movement or foot movement, excuse me. You have less stamina. You might get hit a little bit more, especially if you're not adjusted to that weight class. It's like, I don't think certain people realize that, but like I said, we'll see.
Without even doing a whole lot, he doesn't throw a ton of punches. He throws less now than ever, but he's there. He's got this frame and his physique, and I smart Canelo. The guy's a tank. Like he's very physical in the ring without doing a whole lot, just because of his presence. So I'm curious to see how Terence, how Bud can deal with that. But dude, kind of like I said about Manny, if anybody can do it, man, it's Bud. He's so smart. The guy's like an alien in there. The way he sees things, the way he pulls the trigger, the game. He's also a game plan guy. They make game plans. They don't just show up and fight. They know what they're doing, how they're doing it.
Well, of course, if you're an all-time grade level fighter, then more than likely you're creating some sort of game plans, and probably a multitude of game plans. Now, if you're asking me more than likely who I think may have more game plans at their disposal, I would probably say Terence Bud Crawford. But don't underestimate Canelo Alvarez's game planning ability, nor his adaptability. Canelo Alvarez is someone that will adapt to a certain degree, if he is having some problems. Probably not quite to as an elite degree as what a Terence Bud Crawford does, but he is someone that still will adapt. Like I said, you cannot defeat the fighters that he's defeated, being outsized in the majority of them against those A-grade level fighters or the same size as them, and not be a great planner or someone that just can never adapt.
Or what round they're doing it in. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting, intriguing fight. It's just really hard for me to forget.
And once again, certain people may take a look at the Bivol fight and say, well, he didn't adapt very well in that one. And he didn't, but once again, it's just hard for me to just completely look at that Bivol fight and state that, oh, Canelo's going to look the exact same here, or that all the same weaknesses are just going to appear here. Because Canelo Alvarez just very clearly was not at peak form in that fight. And I'm not claiming that he was not at a great point in his career. What I'm claiming is that he just didn't belong at that weight class. He didn't belong there, and he still made the fight, at times, still somewhat competitive. So I mean, that still shows you overall how great Canelo Alvarez still is as a fighter. That he's at a weight class that he really doesn't belong at whatsoever. And at times, really before that of an Beterbiev, he gave Bivol probably the most competitive fight of his career. So I mean, and Bivol is not chopped liver. Like he's a legit top five pound per pound fighter, one of the greater light heavyweights that we've all seen. So I mean, it just is what it is. But the thing overall is that Canelo did not have great stamina in that fight, even from the first 4 rounds. He was a guy to where his feet were even worse than usual. And on top of that, his power was not able to affect Dimitri Bivol. Will any of those same factors be prevalent in the Terence Crawford fight? It's possible, but I don't see it being, to that extreme of a degree.
The Madrimov fight at 54, which was 2 weight classes ago. And I think Madrimov is phenomenal, by the way. I think he's a really, really good fighter. And
I think he's a really, really good fighter as well, but that's that's pretty much about all he is. He's a really, really good fighter, just short of great. There are certain fighters that are really, really good. They can give overall certain great fighters, a very, very tough competition. But whenever they finally have to get in the ring with that great fighter, they almost always come up short. Like Zab Judah was another one of those fighters. Zab Judah was at one point in time a legit top 10 level pound per pound fighter, and he was an A grade level fighter. But whenever Zab Judah had to face an all time great level talent, he could never beat him. Like he could never beat Cotto, he couldn't beat Kostya Tszyu, he couldn't beat Floyd Mayweather, he couldn't beat Carlos Baldomir. Sometimes he couldn't even defeat some of the top contenders like Joshua Clottey and some of those guys.
I think that people underestimated how good Madrimov really was, and he was mashing wits with Crawford all night long. But the size, the strength, the physicality, that was all an issue for Crawford that night. Jump up 2 more weight
Agreed.
classes. It's again, it's a lot of factors to think about. But it's 2 great fighters fighting. They're just a couple weight classes apart.
Yeah, like that Madrimov fight is I don't know. It's a weird one in a way because you look at it and you think, yo, Madrimov landed these punches. What's going to happen if Canelo lands these punches? Because he will land some of those type of punches. And like, look how close of a fight those two had. Now you had a guy who's 2 weight classes more who knocks out guys that are like 190, 200 in his fights. Like, it's like,
And that's why, you have so many of these people saying that, well, Canelo Alvarez, how is he going to knock out Crawford? He didn't knock out Berlanga, or Jaime Munguia. Like, dude, they're not even comparable in size. Like, what are you talking about? Like, Canelo Alvarez is not someone that is a natural super middleweight fighter. He's a guy that really is more of a natural middleweight. But he's still able to hurt and knock down these guys from that of a Jaime Munguia to an Edgar Berlanga, or even hurt at times a Dimitri Bivol, or at least make Dimitri Bivol feel his power. So I don't think people realize how strong Canelo Alvarez can be. That being stated, is he someone that is just, the supreme knockout artist over a lot of elite level fighters? No, not always, of course. In fact, a lot of his A grade level wins, he didn't end up getting the stoppage anyway. But the point is that Crawford is moving up a couple of weight classes. And I understand that certain people are saying, well, take a look at Jamel Charlo. That's fine. But Jamel Charlo is really more of a middleweight fighter. Crawford is not. He's really more of a natural 147 pounder. So, I mean, that's just my personal take on it. But like I said, Canelo is fighting guys that not only are a decent amount bigger than Crawford, they're also a decent amount bigger than him. I don't think a lot of people really realize how much power you have to have, not only to just stop those guys, but to even just knock them down.
well, look, like what's going to happen. But I don't know. Like I said, I think a lot of people are underestimating how good Madrimov is, and also that Madrimov.
And to be quite honest with you, in my personal view, I think they're actually overestimating how good he is. Madrimov is someone that is a very good fighter, and he threw a whole bunch of feints, and I don't expect Canelo Alvarez to throw quite as many feints as what a Madrimov did, and of course, I don't expect his feet to be anywhere near as fast. But when I take a look at some of these new Uzbekistani fighters, like Madrimov and Akhmadaliev, they pretty much have the same style, which of course, you kind of expect because they more than likely probably grew up together, or were trained by similar trainers or similar training programs, in terms of that of the Uzbekistani amateur style. But they throw a whole bunch of these feints. They move around a lot with pretty damn good footwork, but they just very rarely actually like bite the bullet and throw. Like they throw a lot of these fucking feints, they'll throw 300 feints and then like 5 punches. Like all that is great, but it's like you gotta actually pull the trigger in order to win a fight. Which is why many people, including myself, predicted Madrimov to lose to that of a Virgil Ortiz, which is exactly what happened.
help Bivol prepare for Canelo. He just is. He's a lot faster than Canelo too. With his, if you've seen his footwork drills are freaking crazy. The
better conditioning too. Better
yeah,
conditioning
those
than Canelo.
Uzbek football drills are crazy. You know, just my thing with this is I feel I have such, and maybe I'm wrong. I have such high esteem for Crawford's IQ that I think it levels out the weights.
It could.
Terence Crawford is a very intelligent fighter. That being stated, what I will personally state is this. I don't think that his IQ is quite as high as what certain people are rating it. And I'm not claiming overall that he's not an extraordinarily talented or an extraordinarily intelligent fighter, but people are acting like Terence Crawford is like Floyd Mayweather Jr. or something, and he's just not. Terence Crawford is someone that is an all-time great level fighter. His level of IQ is phenomenal. But the smartest fighter that I've ever personally seen is that of a Floyd Mayweather. I think that Crawford and Canelo's boxing IQ, that is very, very similar. When I take a look at Crawford, even at his absolute best, he's still someone that is a little bit too hittable. He's still someone overall that will make mistakes. He's still someone that is a little bit too hittable. He does not have the most elite defense that I've ever seen in the world. He can be countered by, a good right hand. He also can be countered by a good jab over the top. He's someone that is hittable. It just is what it is. He does not quite have the upper body movement nor defensive ability of a Canelo, at least when Canelo Alvarez is at his absolute best. It just is what it is.
It absolutely could.
And on top of that, Terence Crawford, although he does have very good head movement, his head movement isn't really quite as good as what you may think, which you can see in the Madrimov and the Porter and the Kavaliauskas fights.
I'm thinking about Callum Smith when Crawford targeted his shoulder and basically busted his bicep. Canelo targeted his shoulder and basically busted his arm. Like, that's another thing about Canelo. When you're as big and when you're strong as you are, and you're fighting, guy as small than you, he just has to hit you. He hits your elbow, hits your shoulder.
And that's another thing also that I wanted to bring up as well, because you have a certain amount of these people stating that overall that you just have to land more in a fight in order to win a fight. Not always, and certain people don't understand this. If the judges are hearing Canelo Alvarez's major slaps for shots, even if they're landing consistently or not, they're going to assume that those punches at times are the more impactful punches. So Crawford has to land extremely flush within this fight, and then on top of that, land through Canelo Alvarez's guard to an elite level degree, and either push him back or at least show the judges that I'm landing at a clearly more impactful rate than what Canelo Alvarez is. Can he do that? I'm not quite sure.
Is Crawford going to be able to really keep himself from getting touched all night long? But listen, Crawford's a really strong guy. We've seen how strong he is physically. We saw him, throw Spence around. We've seen him be that way. We didn't see it in the Madrimov fight, but again, like all your points, Madrimov is an excellent fighter and very underrated. But it's a very intriguing fight, and it's one of those ones where it's like, I'm not gonna really know until we're there. Because we're gonna see so much build up. We're gonna get to see these guys. We're seeing them a little bit with each other now, but the fight's still pretty far away. I think as we get closer and we really start getting down to the nitty gritty, it's gonna. I think that's really when the guys who are really looking are gonna be able to know who's probably gonna win.
Yeah, if they do workouts the week before, it'll be a good indication of how they look. Because I remember when I saw Crawford the week before the Spence fight, they did like back-to-back workouts. We saw, Spence do workout, and then we saw Crawford do workout. And I had already been favoring Crawford just because of the styles. And really because of the Ugas fight. I felt like if Ugas did that to Spence, it's going to be a lot worse because Crawford's a lot better and he places the punches better. But when I saw Crawford work out, I just noticed how much quicker he was than Spence. And his reflexes looked just a lot more sharper than Spence. And I thought like, oh, this is not good for Spence. But based off that too, like, because he's coming up in weight, I've noticed Crawford has put on some size. He does look a little bit thicker. And I do wonder, like, what's the right balance there to not lose his speed advantages? Or, he gains so much weight that he becomes a little slower, a little, what's the right word?
Lumbering?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Listen, you're going to give up speed.
And I agree with that point as well, which is why Terence Crawford has to be really, really careful within this fight. Because there's no way that you're going to move up two weight classes to a weight class that you've never been to before, possibly try to compete with that weight. Even if he gains, let's just say, 7 to 10 pounds, he's gonna feel it. So it's like overall, like I said, we'll see what happens. We'll see how well he handles it. But like I said, I'm not quite sure if Crawford will be able to handle it quite as well.
You're putting on tissue that your body's just not used to. I mean, Crawford has a good frame. He's got long arms. He's got wide shoulders. But where everyone has a ceiling. Where's his actual ceiling? And I know, listen, he gets heavy in between fights. He shows himself on the scale. That's different than lean tissue. If you and I'm sure you've been around Canelo. The guy is just dense,
Thick.
from his neck to his ankles. Everything
Yeah.
is thick. He's got thick wrists, thick hands, thick kneecaps, thick ankles. He's got a thick midsection. He's heavily muscled. He's not a big guy, shorter than me, not really wide shouldered, very, very different build, but heavily, heavily muscled, especially around the trunk area.
Canelo Alvarez is very similar to the build of certain fighters like that of a Mike Tyson and like that of a Gervonta Tank Davis, to where for their stature, they're really more about like Gervonta Tank Davis, to be quite honest with you, just height and height overall and what's the word? Height and reach wise, he's really more of a 130 pounder. But because of his muscle density and bone density and all that other stuff, and muscle mass, he's really more of a 135 pounder. But he's not really any bigger than that. Canelo Alvarez is very similar. And Mike Tyson, he'd be probably a cruiserweight today. But Mike Tyson, he's someone that in terms of his height and reach, he really probably should have been more of a cruiserweight. But because of his muscle density and all that other stuff, he could rehydrate it around 220, 230. So, I mean, Canelo Alvarez is very, very similar. He's someone that really, in terms of height and reach, he's not really any bigger than a welterweight or that of a 154 pounder. But in terms of his muscle density and all that other stuff, he really is a little bit more of a middleweight fighter. Now, he of course can compete more at the super middleweight division, partially because of his muscle density, but also because he's extraordinarily level skilled. But like I stated, there's not, other than Billy Joe Saunders, there's not been one fighter that he's fought there that at least has competed there that he didn't bring up in weight that has been legitimately smaller than, or excuse me, has been legitimately, smaller than him. Anyway.
So it's a clash of styles. It's a clash of body types. And yeah, the question is, we've never seen Crawford at 68. And yes, the boxing IQ is there. Obviously, he's had speed, but how fast is he going to be at 68? He's obviously not going to be cutting any weight. So there's that. He'll be fresh.
Canelo Alvarez also appears, at least from what I heard from rumors, that apparently what he's trying to do is that he's trying to cut a little bit of weight for this fight in order to be a little bit faster. And I actually believe that that's the proper way to go, because you're already going to have the power and the size over Crawford anyway. So you might as well be a little bit quicker for this fight and surprise Crawford and catch him off guard. That way you might be able to catch him early. And if you are able to catch him early or catch him somewhat with the counter throughout this fight that he does not see coming, that could be very dangerous for him. But we'll see.
I don't know. Moving around that ring, carrying the extra weight, how's that going to feel? Because that can tire you out too. The gas tank can be different. A lot of things. But I'll say this about the Crawford and the Spence fight week, because I was there as well. Crawford was cutting weight. Crawford looked big at 47. I think that was his last fight at 47 for a good reason. He was not like just the smaller guy. Like they were pretty much the same size at that point. Even though
which is why I've been sitting for a very long time that, when this narrative comes up, like Dante, when he says all this shit about, Crawford's been fighting smaller guys or bigger guys his whole entire career. No, he really hasn't. Crawford is someone that really is a natural 147 pounder. Canelo is someone that really is more of a natural 160 pounder. Like, Canelo has fought guys that have been legit bigger than him, like Golovkin and Danny Jacobs and Caleb Plant and, certain guys like Callum Smith, Sergey Kovalev, Jaime Munguia. Like, those are legit A-grade level fighters that you could debate that are bigger than that of a Canelo Alvarez. And guys like Lara and Trout, and Billy Joe Saunders, those guys were, close in size to him. Jermell Charlo may be a bit smaller, but close in size to him. When you talk about fighters that are legitimately bigger than Crawford, the only fighter that he ever fought that was legitimately bigger, when you consider every physical factor, was really Madrimov. That was really about it. And even with the reach advantage that he had, it still was similar. So this narrative that Crawford has been defeating bigger fighters his whole career, no, he really hasn't. He was a guy that could start off at 135 in the beginning of his career because his physical peak had not really hit yet. His full physical body had not transformed yet. He was always going to transform into a 147 pounder. I always tell people this once again, just because you start off at a certain weight class in your early 20s or in your late teenage years doesn't mean that you're just going to stay at that weight class forever. Take a look at Devin Haney right now. Same thing overall with Terence Bud Crawford. He could stay at those weight classes early on, but then even at 140, he was starting to rehydrate like 20, 25 pounds over the weight limit. So he eventually was going to have to move up. He had no choice.
Everyone always thought that Spence was a much bigger guy, and he always was. Crawford grew into a real welterweight, but he doesn't have time to grow into a real super middle, and I don't think he should, because I think he should maintain some of that speed rather than.
As do I. Why try to take some of your advantages? Because I don't give a shit when anybody says you're not going to outpower or outstrength Canelo Alvarez. You're going to more than likely have to box around him and use your feet and use your hand speed. So why on earth would you try to compete with his muscle density and his muscle mass? It just makes no sense. So I'm expecting maybe that Crawford will try to come in a bit bigger. I'm hoping not at, as massive of a weight as some rumors allege. But like I said, we'll see, because it's really hard to tell, because you can't just tell by the eye test. So we're going to have to really see what they weigh in at or what the rehydration weight is at.
Size. But I don't know. We'll see. Again, Crawford is something special, dude. I swear, he's like an alien. The way he's able to maneuver and make his body work for himself the way he has.
Or he's on some sort of substance. The snack program. Anyway, but that being said, of course, let me say allegedly, because of course no one with the snack program has been caught on that at PEDs. That being stated, for those of you that have already watched my channel, you already know my opinion about the snack program. I'm not saying that those guys are 100% on it, but just in my personal view, are they more than likely on it? Yeah, probably. There's no way that you're going to sit here and tell me that Victor Conti, that he's this guy that knows how to get past the test and knows how to microdose and is working hand in hand with USADA at certain times, or with that Avada testing, and he was once upon a time one of the top former suppliers of PEDs across the world, and that there's nothing suspicious about that. Okay.
Last one for you, Chris. It's a two-parter.
And let me just state this overall very, very quickly before I get some of these pro-blackities in here saying, why aren't you mentioning overall guys like Virgil Ortiz and Jesse Rodriguez? When I say the snack program, I'm talking about all their fighters, not just Crawford, okay? Calm your tits.
If Crawford does this and pulls this off, what does it do for his legacy? Where do you rank him all time? And on the flip, if Canelo beats Crawford, what does that do for his legacy and how he's perceived as a fighter going forward in the future?
Just in my personal view, there's kind of, two different perspectives. There's, of course, the fans' perspective, and then, of course, us boxing aficionados' perspectives. When you talk about that of the boxing fans, if Crawford wins this fight, he's going to be elevated to the greatest fighter of all time. In my personal view, where would that elevate him? If not, he at least would have to be in the debate as the greatest fighter of all time. No, his resume is not the most vast, but he would have to be at least, be there. To be the first, male fighter to be undisputed in 3 separate weight classes and then beat Canelo Alvarez the way that he did. Although, Canelo obviously is not at the best point in his career anymore, but he's still at a great point. So you'd still have to give him a lot of credit for that. And Crawford, it's not like he's at the best point in his career anymore either. So, it is what it is. As for Canelo Alvarez, or at least as for Crawford, in my view, he would have to at least be on certain guys like a Sugar Ray Leonard and a Roy Jones Jr. level. So the top 10, the top 20 fighters of all time at a minimum. For Canelo Alvarez, if he ends up beating a Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, what that would do is put him around on the same level as a Marvin Hagler, probably above him. Because Marvin Hagler, to be quite honest with you, he did have a tough fight against Roberto Duran. A fight to where Duran was someone that never really should have went above 147. And he was actually losing on the scorecards, I believe, before the final few rounds, which should have never happened in the first place. And then on top of that, he also lost to Sugar Ray Leonard. So if Canelo was able to beat Terence Bud Crawford, he would be above Marvin Hagler on my list, which would mean that Canelo Alvarez would probably have to be debated as the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. And I think that he's already within that conversation. But then on top of that, he'd have to be at least within top 20, pound for pound of all time conversations. And then if he goes on to beat guys like Hamza Shiraz, and maybe that one Mexican fighter, I forget his name, like Pacheco, whatever his name is, Canelo, I'm not really quite sure exactly where I would rank him, but he at least would have to be within the top 20, maybe even top 10 of all time, somewhere around there. I know certain people overall would heavily disagree with that, but Canelo has one hell of a career.
Kind of similar to what Canelo said last year. It's a lose-lose for him. With a win, it's like everyone's just going to say, yeah, duh, you're supposed to beat him. But actually context matters. How he wins is going to matter. If he struggles to get by and wins a decision, I think it's going to hurt Canelo. If he goes out there and he knocks him out, it's going to be like, yeah, all right, cool. You knocked that guy 3 weight classes below you. You're supposed to. Crawford wins. I mean, forget it. We're talking. Now we're entering the all-time great status. We're talking about pound for pound, just based on everything he's done so far, which has been a ridiculous amount of things. Undisputed in multiple weight classes. All the weight classes that he's won titles. Just jumping over middleweight to grab the undisputed at 68. It's nuts. Even saying it out loud sounds crazy to me, but the guy might do it. That's the crazy thing about it.
It's definitely possible, especially if Canelo Alvarez does not have the right game plan, and if he overall does not dot his I's and cross his T's. So we'll see.
If he loses, I don't really think it affects his legacy all that much. All the accomplishments that he already has, Crawford.
For us boxing aficionados, it would not affect his legacy that much, but what I will personally state is this. We are going to take a look at Crawford's resume about 10, 20 years later on, and we're going to say, wow, he is someone that was phenomenal, but how many A-grade level names are there on here really? I think that the boxing world will be a little bit more forgiving of Crawford because he's that of a black American fighter, and I understand that certain people are going to say, what are you talking about? Those guys are victims sometimes of the most racial double standards and all sorts of stuff, blah, 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 right? But a lot of people predict that Crawford, that he's, kind of, his resume and also his ability at certain times, just in my personal perspective, that it's a little bit better than what it actually is, especially his resume, because many people just immediately put him in the same category as a Floyd and a Pernell Whitaker because he's a black American fighter that also has a slick style. So they immediately think that he's already with those guys. But the point is that, overall is that if Crawford does lose this fight, especially dominantly, although it's not going to take as much of a hit as if Canelo were to lose, but it still would take a hit.
Those are not going to be forgotten. He's jumping up 2 weight classes.
And Crawford knows that, which is why he's taking this fight in the first place. He understands that he understands that Canelo Alvarez is his key to overall reaching that promised land of the top 10 to top 20 greatest fighters of all time.
So I take it as a win-win, loss-loss situation for these guys. Win-win for Crawford and lose for Canelo.
Yeah, there's, just now that I think about it, I think there's a lot on the line for Canelo in this, in terms of something that Crawford brought up during the press conference, and he told him, hey, look, every time you stepped up against an elite guy, you lost. You lost against Floyd. You lost against Bivol. The disputed win over GGG, that first fight.
Lara.
And Lara, yeah, it's like every time you fought an elite guy, it's, you either lost or something murky. And I think for Canelo to, I don't know, I feel like to him to finally prove like, hey, look, this is what I did to an elite guy. Like, look,
And that's definitely what's on the line for Canelo Alvarez. Now, in my personal view, of course, the narrative of Canelo Alvarez losing to every elite fighter, is that the case? No, of course it's not. And I understand overall that, people might say, well, overall he didn't just do it completely without controversy. Right, but there's a bunch of fighters who didn't do that. The point is that Muhammad Ali, do you think he just won every fight without controversy? There are people that believe that he lost a Jimmy Young fight. There are people that believe that he lost all 3 Ken Norton fights. He lost a Joe Frazier fight. So it's like, it happens. Sugar Ray Leonard is someone that, lost the first fight to Roberto Duran. People don't really think that he beat Tommy Hearns or Marvin Hagler. Oscar De La Hoya was someone that also lost a certain amount of fights in his career, had a couple of controversial decisions. So the point is overall is that this has happened to everybody, but, or a lot of all-time great level fighters. But that being stated, as I stated, the narrative, Canelo realizes that that's what the narrative is about him. And if he dominates Crawford, he is overall once again, going to be looked at in a different light, or at least that noise is going to be hushed down a little bit more.
I could handle this style. Yeah, I wasn't able to do it against Floyd. Floyd and Crawford are different fighters. I was too young back then, but look what I
Agreed. And I do agree overall with that guy in that point. He understands what Canelo Alvarez or what's in it for Canelo
did, regardless of the weight situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point made by Crawford. And that's a good way to get under Canelo's skin. And there is a lot on the line for Canelo because if he.
And let me also state this. I don't agree with the narrative that Terence Crawford that he just hasn't fought anybody in his career either. Although, of course, I don't believe that he has the resume of a Canelo. But what I will personally state is that, Crawford, although I wouldn't go with that narrative either, a lot of his haters or a lot of people, they will go with that narrative for many years if Terence Crawford, if he ends up just getting completely outclassed or embarrassed in this fight, and if it's not even close.
loses this, the tarnish on his.
He'll almost kind of be looked at, as an Aaron Pryor type of figure, someone that, overall was a great fighter. But when you really take a look at his resume, he has a few, really good A grade level names and one fantastic A grade level name, like what Aaron Pryor did over Alexis Arguello. But if he just gets his ass completely handed to him by that of a Canelo Alvarez, he may probably, more than likely, he's probably going to be held within the realms of that of a Sugar Ray Leonard and Roy Jones and some of those other guys, more than likely. But we'll see.
On his legacy.
Now, in my personal view, would it hold Crawford from those guys? I'm not quite sure. But in my view, I'm not really quite sure if I can claim that Crawford is quite on the level of those guys. Not necessarily that in terms of ability that he can be. It's just, I don't think that his resume is just quite as expansive enough. Which is why I've always stated that in my personal view, when you take a look at Canelo and Crawford, in terms of the all-time greatness scale, I think that they're both all-time great level fighters. But just because of the level of resume, I would have to probably put Canelo a little bit above him. And if he does end up beating Crawford, especially in very dominant fashion, that pretty much would be the end of it.
He's massive, massive. Like, dude, you lost to a welterweight. You lost to a lightweight. He was a lightweight world champion. You lost to a lightweight. You guy jumped up 2 weight classes. The guy was 38 years old. There's going to be a lot of that. A lot of the criticism.
Definitely. That's what a lot of the narrative definitely would be, especially for a lot of these guys that are preying on the downfall of Canelo Alvarez. And of course, once again, there's going to be a lot of people preying on the downfall of Crawford. Make no mistake about it, as I mentioned.
That Canelo's been getting lately by not fighting certain guys, that's gonna come back to haunt him that much more.
My only thing, I guess, to that was be if he does lose, I see it as a very competitive fight. He lost against a guy will be considered an all-time great, a very, very special fighter. And Canelo's already accomplished so much. I don't think it's going to tarnish. Everyone has short-term.
Well, it definitely would tarnish his career. And even Chris Algieri just said, I don't know. Because Chris Algieri is a very smart dude. This is exactly why I like him, because he understands the perspectives of other people, and a lot of the times what carries over, not overall just in terms of reality, but also in terms of narrative. He understands that narrative overall carries a lot more than that of reality. And at the end of the day, the thing is that if Canelo does lose to a Terence Crawford, yes, his legacy would have to be looked at as completely different. You lost to a guy that was moving up 2 weight classes, and a guy that was damn near 38 years old. Of course, you're not the same fighter that you once were either. But still, at the end of the day, it would have to be looked at as different. Canelo Alvarez all of a sudden would then have to be within the same realm as certain guys like, overall a Marvin Hagler or Sugar Ray Leonard if he wins this fight. All of a sudden, to guys like Oscar De La Hoya. And De La Hoya, in my personal view, is a couple levels above certain guys like that of a Sugar Ray Leonard or guys like that. But anyway.
Memory, Chris. A short-term memory, bro. They're going to forget about that. They're going to remember.
No, they will not forget about that. And Canelo Alvarez, I think, also realizes that. But Canelo, I believe, sees enough in it for him. If Canelo loses this fight, his legacy is going to be looked at as completely different.
The stadiums he filled up, the people he knocked out, that undisputed run, that.
But of course, that being stated, let me not state overall that forever, because within the first 10 years, his career may be looked at as very different, but within 20, 30 years' time, it'll probably be looked at as a little bit different, because Oscar De La Hoya, for example, he was someone that was extremely popular and extremely great as well, but he was a bit overrated, and people they act like Oscar's like this top 10 level fighter of all time. So maybe this guy could be correct. But that being stated, I do side with Chris Algieri a little bit more. That Canelo Alvarez, that more than likely, because he's held to a higher standard, I think overall that it would affect his career a little bit more. But we'll see.
Error that he went through, that's to me his shining accomplishment, where he took out the division, and he fought the best in that division, and he took them out one by one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a huge. You're talking to a big Canelo fan. I like Canelo. I like what he's done, but he gets a lot of heat out there, man. I gets a lot of heat out there, and I think a loss here is going to be a lot more. So there is going to be that, because I don't get it. There's people who talk about his legacy now as not being that great. I'm like, come on, guy, you're just being. I feel like you're being a hater at this point.
Basically, and let's be real, the main people overall that are really doing that about Canelo Alvarez. Let's be real. We all know who they mainly are. The pro-blackities from a lot of these channels overall that basically say Canelo's not that great. Name a fighter he fought in their prime. Because, once again, they realize that Canelo Alvarez, if he starts winning, if he won this fight, he is going to be debated as one of the greatest fighters ever within that top 10 to top 20 range by many fans. It just is what it is. So they understand that they need to do damage control. Now, whether Canelo Alvarez deserves to be there because of this win is kind of up to you. In my personal view, it would at least put Canelo Alvarez in the top 20 because I do not think that Canelo is quite at the same point in his career as what he once was. And Crawford, he's fighting, of course, a super middleweight, but Canelo's really more of a middleweight. He's not really a super middleweight. So, I mean, it is what it is. Anyway.
But if a loss here is just going to fuel and fan those flames.
Agreed, which is why I stated that earlier. For both of these fighters, the quote-unquote criticisms that they've wanted to go away, it's either going to once again spread like a wildfire, or, especially for the next several years, or, overall it's going to quiet a lot of the noise. That's really what this fight is about.
I'm still going to understand, like you said, when he was ripping through, I hate to say it, but Yildirim was in there, Yildirim, Callum Smith, BJ Saunders, Caleb Plant. Like, that was awesome. That was prime peak Canelo. He was a machine, and I was at most of those fights. I was at Yildirim, and I was at BJ Saunders. And, it was insane. Insane what he was able to do at that point. The people he had behind him, and just going out there and just performing the way he was, devastating, very good top flight fighters.
Yeah, no, both are going to be in the Hall of Fame. Both are all time.
First ballot.
Great, fighters. This is why they fight the fights, man. May the best man win between the two. Chris, hey man, it's great catching up with you. Thank you for sharing some time with us over here on Fight Up TV. If you have anything you want to plug, go ahead, plug it in, man. Now's your chance.
Always a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. But yeah, just make sure to tune in ppv.com on Fight Night. Get in that chat. We enjoy the more the merrier. Tell your friends. Make sure you keep tuning in. My podcast, Inside Boxing Live with Dan Canobio. We do 2 shows a week. We travel. ppv.com is our headline sponsor. And that's what we're doing.
All right, that is Chris Algieri. This is Marcos Villegas. Thank you guys for watching us over here on Fight Up TV. Thank you guys.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. I thought that video was very particularly interesting. But like I said, we'll see what ends up happening. But Chris Algieri, probably the best breakdown artist that I've seen, really in a very long time. He's debatably the best boxing analyst that I've seen, at least from America. Of course, many people have told me about Duke McKenzie, but like I stated, he either hits a home run or he strikes out. There's sometimes his analyzations where, I completely agree with him, and then other times I think he could give it a little bit more depth. But, I mean, and also other times where, like, he says certain shit like Usyk is not an all-time great level fighter, all sort of shit. He gets involved in this nostalgic rose-colored glasses shit, like, like, I'm so tired of these fighters overall, or these older athletes just, debating that, no one can compete with these athletes or these fighters from 60 years ago. Like, give it a fucking rest. Don't get it twisted. I'm not claiming overall that those guys were not great, but just to claim overall that no one after that they would have been able to deal with them, like, come on. This is what it is. But that being stated, overall, once again, Chris Algieri, very great analyzation. Of course, with the talker that he was talking with, Marco Villegas, I believe, or whatever he said overall his name was. Very interesting little analyzation there. But let me also state this, because we know that there are certain people that probably have a bone to pick with certain fighters, so we cannot trust their analyzations. And in terms of the Canelo Alvarez side, the analyzations that I would not trust in terms of, because they're against him. Certain guys like Teddy Atlas, we all know that he has a bone to pick with that of a Canelo Alvarez. Andre Ward, who not only has a bone to pick with Canelo, but also, of course, is best friends with Crawford. Paulie Malignaggi, possibly Timothy Bradley, because he's also good friends with Crawford. And certain things like that. So it's there's kind of a lot of analyzations in my personal view that I would not take that personally. But of course, analyzations, that I would take personally, that I think overall that are not, a biased source would be certain guys like, maybe that of a Keith Thurman, although Thurman he's not a bad analyzer, but he's someone that, in my personal view, thinks at times that he's a bit smarter than what he actually is. I'm not claiming that, overall that Keith Thurman is dumb necessarily. But he kind of comes across as one of those guys that reads books just to seem like he's much smarter than what he actually is. Like, he seems like that one guy, at the party to wear those glasses, those fake glasses, to seem like a scholar when really he hasn't done anything like that. Just my personal view of it, but, it is what it is. But certain opinions that I would take very seriously, Abel Sanchez, Joel Ortiz, I thought that Shane Mosley had a great breakdown of this. I'm trying to think of other analyzations that I personally seen. But of course, you pretty much, you go with whoever you thought. But just in my view, the best analyzations that I've seen of this so far have been Chris Algieri, Sugar Shane Mosley, Joel Ortiz, and also that of Abel Sanchez. Those are the best predictions, in my personal view, or the best breakdowns that I've seen of this potential fight. And they all believe that Crawford can potentially win the fight, but they also have the same concerns that I have. I could be wrong once again. We'll see. But like I said, we'll see when this upcoming fight. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.